So this is Matthew 6:22-23. The light of the body is the eye. So then if your eye is generous, the whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is grudging, your whole body will be in the dark. If then the light which is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness?
Okay, they had the idea there that the eye is a window into your soul, and the eye was the way that light entered your body and entered your soul. So if your eyes are clear, if a window is clear, the light can come in. If a window is dirty, the quality of the light entering through the window is distorted. So that was a very interesting way to do it. So take of people depends on the kind of eye that we have. So there are certain obvious things which can blind our eyes and distort our visions. And number one is something that I think everybody suffers with, even if they don't know it, and that's prejudice. Prejudice can distort your vision. There's nothing which so destroys judgment as prejudice does. It prevents them from forming the clear, reasonable, and logical judgment which it is everyone's duty to form. It blinds them alike to facts and the significance of the facts.
We have really had to face that issue this past year. There have been so many things that hopefully have brought us to think about our own prejudices.
Yeah, and I think, especially having worked in Black colleges for so long, the prejudice on both sides. I saw just as much prejudice from Black people against white people, which was kind of I got a very interesting cultural education with my career. But seeing people just automatically dismiss me because I was white, like, oh, okay. Yeah, I got a little taste of what they had dealt with.
Right, that they dealt with all of their lives.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I had my first job out of college was in a similar situation, and and so my experience was limited. It wasn't lifelong in terms of
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And it actually reminds me of a movie I saw years ago, grade B movie, and a white kid made himself appear to be Black to get a scholarship that was aimed at Black people because he hadn't gotten good enough grades to get into Harvard. He got the scholarship, and it was kind of funny, watching him try to stay Black and hide it from his parents and blah, blah, blah. And at the end, of course, he got caught, and he's sitting with the dean of students, who was a Black man, I think. And the dean said, well, what did you learn from being Black? And the kid said, I really don't think I learned anything because I always knew if it got to be too much, I could wash it off. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me. It's like he had sense enough to know that his experience had not been real. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So other than race, what kind of prejudices might you have or might you have experienced?
Age discrimination.
Having a beard.
Yep, having a beard.
Really? Like what?
Well, when I was right after graduate school or in that period, I was looking for a job. I went to King's Dominion, and when I pulled up to the gate, the guard said, are you going to get rid of that beard? And I said, no. He said, you might as well turn your car around. And I kind of laughed. And when I went in, first thing was no beard or no job. So I said, thank you very much. And my beard is now 50 years old.
I think sexism certainly existed when we were all younger, and it does to some degree now, not like it used to be. When I was in the academy in the Richmond Police Department, there was not a single female sworn supervisor.
Imagine that.
Well, I don't want to go very much. Politics is the word. So whether you're a star-bellied sneetch or a no-bellied sneetch, you're the devil, So there's a lot of prejudice that way.
Yeah. Joe?
I worked with the subsidiary of a large international company. And when I went to work, they told me that there was a retirement plan. And then after I'd been there a little bit, I asked about the retirement plan, and the senior vice president told me, well, you had to be there a year before you qualified. And he didn't tell me anything else. So I had made friends with the secretary of the president and the receptionist, and I asked them about it, and they said, oh, you've got to be management to be in the retirement plan. And I didn't know if I was management or not. And I said, well, how do you know if you're management? And she looked at me, she says, it's very easy. If you're a male, you're a management. If you're a female, you're not. And that was 1973. And they also didn't have a single minority working for the company, which changed probably in 1980, I guess it was. But
Well,
Well, I remember.
a friend of mine from college, church that she
Mhm.
was a minister and church that she served for 25 years. When she got ready to retire,
Mhm.
I don't know why she didn't realize this before, but it turns out all those years she'd served the church, they never paid into the pension fund for her, saying that she was married and so her husband would provide for their retirement.
Jamie McDonald is getting ready to do a book study on a book called Black and White. And I haven't read it. I've only read the first introduction and the cover and so forth, but it's apparently based on improving racial relationships one friend at a time, just getting to know your neighbor, to do something. And so it's authored by Tisha Hadra, who's Black, and John Hambrick, who's white, and they've been friends and worked together for a number of years and so forth. So
I think that starts like
starts
in another week or
another
so.
week or
Yeah.
so.
Starts on the
Yeah.
24th at 7.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of college, and this goes back to the late 70s for me, I went to William and Mary, and there were significant number of people who came down from New York, New Jersey, what have you, and they had definite preconceptions of what people in the South were like. For example, we all hated Catholics. We all hated Black people. We weren't particularly bright. So that was a real education.
Yeah.
I came to Virginia in 1966 at the invitation of Uncle Sugar Pie, and was stationed at Langley. And I would say that I was on the edge of original Virginians. I mean, people who've been here, their families have been here a long time in that regard. You know, it was the house and all that stuff, you know. And now we're pretty homogenous. People are from New York and Kansas and California and whatever, you know. So it's a lot different than when I arrived here.
Yeah. Yeah, nowadays, because I am a native Virginian, and I know Nancy is as well, it's unusual for me to be in a group that's, you know, even half Virginians.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
when we had traffic circles, and then we got rid of them. Now we have them back again.
you know, the changing in Churchill in the 60s and 70s
Right.
had a lot to do with people from the North coming to MCV and things, and they had been through some of that, you know, in Harlem and other areas, and it wasn't anything to them to go into an area and you know, carve it back out. Whereas I think it was a lot harder for Southerners to, you know, go into an area and buy a home and invest a lot of money in it and things of that sort.
Yeah, my first department chair at Virginia Union is still alive. She's in her mid-90s now, and she lives in the Brooklyn Park Boulevard area. And she said when she and her husband first bought their house, and this probably goes back about 60 years, at least 50 years, they were one of the first Black families to move into what had been a white neighborhood. And it went all Black. And she said, now it's going the other way. And the whites are coming in and gutting the houses and upgrading them to the point, that I think she may have paid $10,000 or $15,000 for a house, and the house across the street is now assessed at over $500,000. But it's gone from white to Black, and she said now it's a mix now.
Hmm.
So
during the course of our lives, from the time we were kids, we've seen pretty dramatic changes.
yeah. And the author talks about another type of, in terms of science, the example he uses is when Sir James Simpson discovered the virtues of chloroform and as anesthesia and helping women in childbirth, and how there was such an uproar saying, no, this is biblical. Women are supposed to suffer through childbirth. How dare you want to ease their pain?
You kind of get back to the topic of religion in general, and you talk about prejudice. Every religion I know is prejudice against all the other ones.
Yeah. And what Nancy said about hating Catholics, I don't know that I was raised to hate them, but my parents and grandparents certainly looked down on them. I can remember driving, because my grandparents lived about 2 blocks from a Catholic church, and I can remember, being in the back seat and driving by the Catholic church, and my mother would say, see, there they are doing confession, and when they come out of confession, they're going to go get drunk because they can just confess it again next week.
Well, my grandfather was married to a Catholic, and he lived in Pittsburgh, and regularly referred to Catholics as mix. So, that prejudice against Catholics was not exclusive to the South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to the book, one of the most necessary things in life is the fearless self-examination, which will enable us to see when we are acting on principle and when we are the victims of our own unreasonable and unreasoning prejudices. In anyone who is swayed by prejudice, the eye is darkened and the vision is distorted. And I think being that self-aware is challenging.
There's another element to prejudice, and prejudice can be learned and often is learned. And one of my favorite topics is concept mapping and following the chain of ideas and how one thing influences another and what your perception of reality is. So prejudice can be really a broad thing. It can be the flat earth society, it can be, you name it. It's just your concept of what's real. And until something comes along to change your mind and change your concept map of how that part of the world works, you're going to be prejudiced, for lack of a better word, you're prejudiced against anything else.
And also, I think it has to depend on interaction. So if you get to interact with different faiths and different people, that will shape your, viewpoint. But that's another reason why this isolation is so hard, because it does not give us exposure, the necessary exposure on a daily basis to other people, thoughts, and, the world in general.
Well, isolation is an interesting word because we've chosen in our very connected world to go into our own information silos, and we drink our own Kool-Aid. And so we're prejudiced against everybody else because we're only informed by the group that we want to identify with.
Right. But talking, back to what Claire said about meeting other people, my father was as prejudiced against Blacks as my mother until he got a job at Virginia Union. He was there in the School of Business. He was the tech support person. And he did a 180 almost overnight, but he told me and I'll never forget it. He said, this is the first time I've ever met an educated, intelligent Black person. And of course, he had met several. He said, I didn't know they existed. He grew up in such a segregated society that the only Blacks he interacted with were janitors. And he just seemed to assume that that's what they all were like. And
I think we also have to remember that we're part of the animal kingdom, and one of our basic instincts is for survival. And you survive by being able to identify threats. So, for example, if I see somebody that looks like an outlaw biker, with the colors and the whole 9 yards, I'm going to say, "Oops, cross the street, Nancy," and go into the nearest store. And a lot of that is you learn to identify threats based on physical characteristics. So I think that's where some of it comes from.
yeah.
Well, and I have to admit, one of my prejudices is seeing kids walking around with the hoods up.
Mhm.
And that used to always make me think hoodlum when I saw that. But working back in the schools these past couple of years, I've learned that oftentimes, yeah, well, I've learned for a lot of kids, the hood up is, there you go. The hood up is a defense mechanism that they feel extremely emotionally vulnerable. And they put that hood up as a protective act. They may act rough and tough, but a lot of them, you sit down, and you talk to them for a while, and you find out they're feeling very vulnerable emotionally. And that hood gives them a sense of protection. And they still have those hoods up even on the computer.
Wow.
There's a quote by Mark Twain also regarding countries and travel. And he says, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. That when you travel to other countries and get to know other people in other countries and really get to know the people rather than seeing them as oh, those Irish or oh, those Scottish or the Russians or whatever, people who have traveled and see the real people there, that are like them, who love their kids, that are doing everything that they can to survive, that you really learn a lot when you go and go to other countries and see things, or other parts of our country and see things.
When we were in Scotland, we just had a great experience, and the people were wonderful and friendly and would help you with anything you needed. And we pulled off on a wayside where you take photographs over a mountainside or something. And this couple came up and they recognized that we were Americans and they were Americans. And man, they latched on to us and complained about everything possible. And I said, no wonder, I don't even want to be identified with these people, So.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Isn't Scotland beautiful?
Yeah. Okay.
Good morning, Stuart. Glad you could join us this morning.
Well, when I had tried earlier to get on, I had no internet. I had nothing here. So I just tried again.
There you go.
Okay.
Good.
Well, we had technical difficulties, so we were a little late getting started anyway. Okay, the second thing that can distort our vision is jealousy. And he gives an example from a Shakespeare play, and then says that many a marriage, many a friendship have been wrecked by jealousy. When you just distort facts. So the third one is self-conceit. There's nobody in this group that suffers from this. Self-conceit can doubly affect our vision, for it renders us as incapable of seeing ourselves as we really are, and incapable of seeing others as they really are. If people are convinced of their own surpassing wisdom, they will never be able to realize their own foolishness. And if they're blinded to everything except their own virtues, they'll never be aware of their own faults. When they compare themselves to others, they will do so to their own advantage and to the disadvantage of other people.
I think there's so much when you think of jealousy, it isn't just jealous about, your friends or your mate or whatever. It's just being jealous for other people's success, you know, or seeing someone that has something that you don't have, or, you know, there's really a lot to, I think jealousy is really something that all of us are guilty of. And it's kind of like a poison, you know,
Yeah.
for you, you know,
The grass is always greener.
yeah.
Yeah, until you get there and you find out it's not. Yeah, I only heard this a few times in my life, but it always surprised me. And jealousy may be a little overstatement, but my mother was jealous of people who could sing. She always wanted to be able to sing.
I'm like your mama then. I'm just like your mama.
And I can't sing. I accept that I can't sing. And so it always just kind of surprised me, because I was like, okay, I can do other things. I'm not going to worry about the fact I can't sing. So I never thought about it. And every once in a while she'd say something and I would just look at her and go, huh? Where'd that come from? Okay. So moving on. Barclay then talks about the necessity of the generous eye. We've been talking about our vision. And he, I'm gonna at this point skip the etymology of the word. Hold on. So Jesus is saying, there is nothing like generosity for giving you a clear, undistorted view of life and people. There is nothing like the grudging and ungenerous spirit for distorting your view of life and people. So to clear our vision, we must be generous in our judgments of others. So not just generous with things, but generous with the way we think about people. You know, giving them the benefit of the doubt, looking for the good in people, and not just automatically assuming that the hood up is a bad thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
I think always assume good intentions. That's I found that to be very helpful, because there's some people who, if something happens, they always want to interpret it with the most negative spin possible. But if you assume, well, maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe it was a positive thing and you're just looking at it the wrong way.
I see a lot in certain schools of thought as far as taking one piece of a situation, taking things out of context, not getting the whole picture, and making an assumption based on that one piece of information. I found more, you know, if I look at the whole picture, and those of you that know me, if you tell me about something, I want to know the whole story. I want to know, you know, the whole situation before I take any action. But I've just found it works so much better if I know the whole story.
Well, and being from your profession too, I would think that
It has been a part of what I was trained to do.
you have to learn how to see
Right.
that.
But you know, the training was find out the whole story, because there's more to the story.
I think
than
that's
what
the
you usually see.
problem in the society we live in today, you know, where you can't say a word without somebody coming back at you with some counter argument,
Mhm.
no matter what it is. I like cherry pie and I'll start a war, you know. It's really down to some of our communication techniques of so many characters in a tweet or whatever, but we've become so sensitized that you can hardly have a statement without starting some kind of argument.
Well, and I remember at work, you know, you'd be talking with someone and everything would be just fine, but you get an email from someone and you don't know what they mean. You know, they might not mean, you might take it badly, you know, because of the way it's written. and you can't see the person behind it talking to you and hear the inflection in their voice. You just are reading something, so there have been a lot of miscommunications just because of the nature of sending a message.
Yeah, I had a boss that when email started becoming the way to communicate, she was terrible. And I learned very quickly that after 2 exchanges, you better be down at her door talking to her, because she was off to the races in some tangent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another experience that I had in terms of judging others, I was in college when I got first divorce, and this was over 40 years ago, so a totally different atmosphere. 3 of the male teachers just, divorced female. Ooh, let me have her. And that really skewed my view of single men for a while. It's like, they're all after just one thing, and it took me a while before I could see a guy just as a guy, because of some of the experiences I had when I was in college.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, we must be generous in our actions, not just the way we think. What you should ask yourself this: what can I do? Where can I help? And this is talking about Mark Rutherford, who was a novelist. I'm not familiar with him. It seemed to him then, as always, that any kind of action was of more value than the most vehement indignation that spent itself in talk. So actions speak louder than words, and you need to be generous with your actions. And just as an example, he's not going to say this. Yesterday, our power went out for 2 or 3 hours. And Tom says 5. We have a generator, but it's not an automatic thing. Tom has to go out and start the generator, and then I had to throw the switch on the electrical box, and some things had to be plugged in. But it was a lot easier than what it used to be. And the very first thing he did, as soon as our power was restored, was to take an extension cord and run it to the people next door.
Sweet. Good Tom.
Yeah. And I made muffins. I was in the process of making muffins when the power went out. So I finished them as soon as I had power. And Tom said, take some next door. And the lady across the street is next door, so make sure you take her some.
You can make it there with the ice.
Yeah, well, actually, our driveway and the driveway never got real slick. I had to be careful, but I've been out to get the paper and get the mail every day without any trouble.
That's surprising, because your driveway is so flat. But I would have thought it would have been really slick.
I guess it was warm enough. But yeah, right now it's just wet. Lots of ice in the trees, but the driveway is just wet. Okay, there are 3 great evils of the ungenerous spirit, of the I that is grudging. Number 1, it makes it impossible to live with ourselves. If you're a grudging person, if people are forever envying other people's success, grudging other people's happiness, shutting their hearts against the needs of others, they become the most pitiable of creatures, people who bear a grudge. Then number 2, it makes it impossible to live with other people. Mean people are abhorred by all. The people whom everyone despises are those who are miserly of heart. And I liked this so much, I actually put a star by it. Charity covers a multitude of sins, but the grudging spirit makes useless a multitude of virtues. However bad generous people may be, there are those who will love them. And however good mean people will be, everybody will detest them. So you may be rotten to the core, but if you're generous, that's a saving grace. But if you're mean-spirited, There's nothing good they can say about you. And number 3, and this is the most important one of all, being grudging, jealous, it makes it impossible to live with God. There is no one so generous as God, and in the last analysis, there can be no fellowship between two people who guide their lives by diametrically opposite principles. Give me 2. I just got a 2-minute warning that we're going to have to end so Tom can do a mic check for Kendra.
I thought that was a chainsaw.
It's a little tinkle, tinkle, tinkle on Tom's phone. And that does finish a section, so I guess that's, but we do have a couple of minutes if you have some comments.
Nice lesson. I enjoyed it.
Me too.
Short and sweet.
Well, I really enjoy hearing the experiences of everybody in the group. I think that to me is one of the biggest benefits of the salad group is, you know, the diverse world experiences that everybody brings to the classroom. So thank you all.
Yeah, because we can learn from other people's experiences. We don't have to go out and do it all ourselves.
True.
It's something to put it into context, because I know all of you to varying degrees, and I know that Nancy comes from a background in law enforcement, and so when I hear your comments, and maybe this is a form of prejudice, but it's like, I know this comes from Nancy's experience in interacting with people, and so I forget exactly what you said, but it was basically assume the good, and I think that comes from your life experience, you know. So.
And I think it seems like it would be really hard for you to always assume the good because of your experiences with all kinds of people.
I would
you know
assume
that
they're
it's
rotten.
a real benefit, you know, or you know, when I hear about some of the people that we know that are in law enforcement and the kinds of people that they've had to deal with, you know, to really look for the good is really a testament.
We need to let Tom get on.
Yeah.
Well, you can leave this meeting and leave the talk.
Yeah, y'all can, since I'm not the host, y'all can keep talking. Because Kathy is the host.
Technically.
So I can leave and y'all can keep going.
Host, do you have any of those little crackers or sausages?
Well, we're supposed to.
Nancy, what is your background?
Well, back in 1981, I started with the Richmond Police Department, and I was a patrol officer and then a sergeant. Worked there for about 7.5 years, and then I left the Richmond Police and went with the state police as a civilian, and I worked there as a policy writer and staff inspector.
Okay, all right.
So were you one of the first female sergeants?
I was, I think, in the second batch.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there were 3 or 4 that went before me, but I was in the second wave. And one of the guys in my academy class, and this was before there were any female sergeants, that the conversation came up, and he said, "I don't think I could ever work for a female sergeant."
Yep. I remember those kinds of guys. Yeah.
And the public too. The public used to crack me up because I remember I was a field training officer one time, and my trainee was this rather husky black male. I mean, he just looked like Mr. Muscle Man. So we roll up to this domestic, and everybody comes piling out of the project housing and is telling their story to the black male, and just on and on and on and on and on. And he's nodding his head, and he's nodding his head. And when they get to the end of the story, he looks at me like, "What the hell do I do now?" And then they all kind of look confused and then start repeating the story to me. So I thought that was kind of a hoot.
I was a paralegal for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
So a little bit of law there.
Indeed. Oh, goodness.
What does everybody do? Since I'm new to the class, I don't know everybody's background.
Which firm did you work with?
McGuire Woods.
You know, Tom Kebnis,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he was my neighbor. He just moved to Durham. I think.
I thought Tom was in Carolina.
Well, he was in Charlotte. He came
Charlotte,
back.
yeah.
He came back to Richmond. He was the managing partner of the Richmond office.
Well, that was
and-
after my time.
Yeah, and then he retired. He was in an automobile accident last December, and then he retired and went to Durham.
Yeah. He I don't remember the department. Tom was in corporate area, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was where I was corporate.
So
Okay.
Joe,
I worked in the trust department at Wachovia, First Union, Crest-Star. So
Mhm.
I did stuff. I can't remember the big trust guys, trust and estate guys.
Tom Word,
Tom
John,
Brockenborough.
pardon?
Tom,
Yeah, Brockenberg, yeah,
it wasn't Tom though, I don't think it was Henry Brockenborough.
yeah.
So were you with SunTrust or what was it, Crestar at that time?
Crest-Star, yeah,
Because I was there too in mortgage.
yeah.
I remember Henry.
I don't remember him.
He'd been at Crest-Star. No, when he left Crest-Star, he went with the smaller firm there on Main Street, Thomas, and the guy that there used to be a family in our church that was a lawyer, and he's come back like once or twice or something. Gosh, it was years and years ago. I can't think of his name.
Well, I've been retired since 2009, so
Yeah.
there are lots of young people. In fact, I went out on the website, a couple of months ago, and I thought, my gosh, I don't even know a third of these people anymore. And people that were, young associates when I were there, now they're department heads and what have you. It's like, he's still wet behind the ears.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So Barbara, tell Stuart what you did.
I was an occupational therapist and I
Ah.
worked in schools most recently. But before that, it would be hospital, it would be rehab. Did a lot of rehab, home health. I had a wonderful career. Very varied, but always the core of working with individuals who had often some of the most awful experiences of their whole life was whatever has happened to them, a stroke, an accident, whatever. And so to work with them at that time in their life was really a pretty amazing opportunity.
I remember one time she was working in hand therapy, and one of the interesting thing was she was working with a state trooper.
Oh yeah. I remember
And
this one.
was it his finger or his thumb or what was
His fingers, his
it? Was his trigger finger.
index, yeah.
It was his trigger finger. What you got to be able to fire your gun with both hands.
Yep.
And she had to rehab him so he would be able to fire his gun with both
Keep his
hands.
job.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
But the issue was I was very afraid of the gun. And I mean, he would have to show me, multiple times, there's nothing, there's nothing in the chamber, there's no bullets, but still, whew, that was,
That would be me
he
too.
got it where he could, with his non-dominant, he
Was
got
it a
enough
big? Was it a
range.
big gun?
It would look
Oh, my
big to me. Jumbo,
Oh,
Okay.
so Bud and Susan, tell us what you did. You guys did.
Trades Master of Fine Arts.
We met in art school here at VCU, and he was printmaking and I was painting.
Had a very eclectic career from leading various departments in VCU library to heading the exhibit design and fabrication shop at the Science Museum to a myriad of other things. So most recently, higher education, specializing in online teaching and learning, and supporting faculty in their practice using technology and so forth.
Sounds very interesting.
Headed up a department.
Oh, yeah, I was
with,
in Director of Media Production Services, and we did artwork, photography, websites for the medical college and all of VCU. Then I went
Wow.
I was webmaster for the School of Medicine for a while. I was in charge of electronic media at the Virginia Institute for Social Services Training Activities at VCU. So lots of stuff, all kind of creative and art related.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune in all these jobs to somehow weave my creative needs into them and so forth. I think one of the most interesting jobs was at the Science Museum and museum work, where you get to be behind the scenes and handle objects that the public doesn't get to handle. I've
Jefferson Davis's
handled
boots.
the moon rocks and Jefferson Davis's boots, and the Solar Challenger, hung that off of the ceiling, and just kind of exciting stuff.
Yes.
Well, folks, it's 9:56, so time to wrap